When I close my eyes, the sky in my dreams is a deep, dark blue.
Following some uncertain years spent chasing market trends, in 2019 Ace Combat returned to familiar ground with a new title. Ace Combat 7's Skies Unknown was competent, safe entry, and it saw a fairly consistent reception among critics and fans. Except for the story. Most reviewers didn't know quite what to make of it, some reviewers condemned it, some others suggested you had to be a fan to get it, but even among fans, feelings were pretty tepid. Why? Let's start from the top. Some have erroneously referred to 7 as a sequel to Ace Combat 5, but it's not. If you did play 5, there are a few names you'll recognise, but it doesn't provide any vital context that isn't also present in 7.
Killed Harling, the president of Osea during the last war, remember?
While many long-running series are afraid to retire old characters or plot lines, Ace Combat is more comfortable creating new ones. So if 7 was your first Ace Combat game, you'll be glad to know that many long-time fans also don't know or care who these people are. The game's premise is simple, and doesn't differ much from the previous games in the big picture. You're a rookie fighter pilot and there's some bad guys to shoot. But that's only half the story. This half, written by Masahide Kito, is delivered through radio chatter, in-engine cutscenes and mission briefings. I'll call this Trigger's story. The other half of the story, written by Sunao Katabuchi, is delivered mostly through cutscenes between missions that the developers call intermissions. The intermissions give players a breather between each mission and show what the world of Ace Combat is like beyond the cockpit. Trigger's story is alright. You can skip all the intermission cutscenes and still have enough context to feel invested in each mission, and better yet, I find Trigger's side of the story isn't grating when replaying, which is good because the game is designed to be replayed. The intermission story, even with the context provided by the rest of the game, is boring, confusing and sparse. As it's the root of most of the story's problems, let's look at it first. The game opens with a voiceover from Avril. We learn a bit about her, she comes from a family of pilots, and what's happening in the world. Drones are predicted to replace human pilots.
I was at the airstrip doing some flight training when I saw it. A prototype drone.
She takes her plane up for a spin, she's shot at, and then it cuts to the first mission. It's fairly low key and exposition heavy, but it's visually interesting and the music sucks you right in. For the second intermission, there's an info dump via news bulletin. We then follow Avril as she is arrested and shipped off to the penal unit the player later joins, the 444. Avril has a lot to say, most of it about the 444. This is useful context for the player for later, but Avril's story still hasn't kicked off. You'd think that her captivity would serve as the first narrative hook, but it's not treated as an obstacle for her to overcome, merely a fact.
So, I tried to escape. They found out and set the dogs on me.
The third intermission introduces a new perspective. Dr. Schroeder, a researcher working with Erusian ace Mihaly and his granddaughters. Dr. Schroeder is using Mihaly's flight data to improve drone AI, and Mihaly is sick and needs a new flight suit. Meanwhile, back at the 444, we're treated to some more exposition from Avril, most of which isn't immediately relevant. At this point, the player has probably been playing for about an hour, maybe more if they struggle with mission 3. The intermissions make up 15 minutes of that hour, and almost all of it has been exposition. Even if you qualify this as a start to the story, it is not a good one. Avril finally has a plan though.
Instead of building fake-ass planes to trick Erusia, I'm gonna build one that'll really take off.
Rather than see her go through the process of restoring a jet, next time we see her, she's already restored several for the 444's convicts to fly. Her implied goal of escaping in a jet is never mentioned again. There are numerous gaps like this throughout the intermission, and often there isn't even a sufficient exposition to bridge them with the last scene. This is confusing as well as frustrating. Between missions 7 and 8, the intermission subtly remembers it's supposed to be telling a story.
Hang on. There's 3 extra planes here. They're foreigners too. Apparently, 2 of our planes took the enemy on alone. The last pilot to land back at the base was that scrawny anarchist dude. After the usual small talk, I turned the topic around to the mission. The hero on this mission was the new guy, the one that killed Harling.
While this doesn't advance her story, we learn a little bit about her and about Tabloid. This section in particular is worth highlighting because it's one of the few moments in the intermission in which one of our main characters is actually doing something rather than telling us about something. This carries into the next scene, in which the 444 is being mobilised into combat. But Avril finally seems to have a solid plan to get out. Is the story finally finding its feet?
So the liaison plane left without me.
No. Avril's plan comes to nothing, and the intermission is about to take its own intermission. There are 20 missions in the game. Avril is last seen in the intermission before mission 10, and won't reappear until mission 17. After his introduction, Schroeder is seen once before mission 6, and won't be seen again until mission 15. On a first playthrough, it'll be easily several hours between these missions. This is ample time to forget details even if you can play this entire stretch in one session. Regardless, when we see Dr. Schroeder again, he's finished his work with Mihaly and is heading to the space elevator with Mihaly's granddaughters. All communication satellites are knocked out worldwide, and Schroeder descends into a civil war. When we see Avril again, she's in an active war zone with a 444, and they by chance come across Erusian Princess Rosa Cossette de Lis. As with earlier, most of these developments are explained through exposition. Despite being a central figure in the story, Cossette hasn't actually done anything yet, and thus hasn't warranted a mention. In the next mission, Avril and Cossette make their debut in-game. They're helping some refugees.
I need you to help some people. There's a group of refugees surrounded by Russian tanks right here. Needless to say, their future's not looking too bright.
The 444 are mysteriously absent from this point on, besides a single mention during a mission briefing. Next intermission, Avril and Co are on a boat heading towards a space elevator.
We had to. We didn't belong there.
It's been quite the journey, and at last we arrive at the intermission's climax, in which the plot threads meet like Captain Davenport and Stadium Turf. Avril and Co arrive at the space elevator, and by apparently pure coincidence find Alma, who takes them to the drone factory, where Dr. Schroeder is uploading Mihaly's data. Enola is trying to stop Schroeder. She takes a gun and shoots a disc containing Mihaly's data, preventing the drones from being improved. However, while the data wasn't broadcast to the drone network, it was uploaded to the factory and is about to produce 2 prototype drones with the new data. Even though getting to this point was incredibly rough, this could have been a tense and exciting climax, but it's barely animated and most of the action is described by Avril. There's some exposition from Schroeder about what Belka's been up to. Enola, who hasn't said a word up to this point, gives Schroeder a lecture.
We have to learn to put that sense of nostalgia behind us and behave like mature adults.
Avril has an actual conversation with Schroeder about the best way to disable the drone factory. In missions 19 and 20, the two sides of the story converge. There's been a lot of foreshadowing of the destruction of the space elevator,
We can destroy the space elevator and cut the power to them.
and Avril's radio chatter suggests that's what she and Cossette are doing.
I said we were going to take down the space elevator, but it's not like we can just go out there and chop it down.
There's so much either alluding to or directly referencing the destruction of the space elevator that it's kind of bizarre it never happened.
Good. What about Tabloid? Is he safe?
To add additional insult to the confusion, one of the 2 intermission characters that we actually have a connection with, Tabloid, dies off screen. In the final mission, you destroy the 2 prototype drones the old-fashioned way, and Cossette gets caught in the blast from a missile.
Cossette!
Avril, they're headed this way. Get the refugees to safety now.
But she's perfectly fine.
Can you hear me? There's still one drone left.
This seems like it was supposed to be a death fake out, but the presentation is so awkward it's anyone's guess what the intent here was. The game closes out with a final voiceover from Avril. She's still at the space elevator with Cossette, who is doing humanitarian work for the refugees there. It's worth noting that the refugees are never properly established. Avril is just suddenly with them during mission 18. I wouldn't even bother mentioning them if they were just one of the plot's many loose elements, but despite having almost no presence in the story, they're presented as a big part of the game's conclusion. Mihaly also has some parting words.
All I do is lie here, wasting away. I'll never know the freedom of flying the open skies ever again.
Unlike the girls, we actually have a direct connection to Mihaly's story and his ultimate fate, so we care about what he has to say. There's a final word from Cossette and then the credits roll. That's the gist of the intermission story. There are many gaps and inconsistencies I've glossed over, as dictating them will be missing the forest for the trees. Bridging these gaps would certainly be an improvement, but it would only serve to make the intermission less confusing, not more interesting. Internal consistency is also important, but consistency is worthless if it's not in the service of a narrative. As mentioned earlier, The scenes are actually trying to form a narrative as scarce, while explanatory voiceovers are the norm. This is the key problem. Not the event of the story, not the gaps in it, but how so much or what little there is becomes packaged into expository monologue. These voiceovers are not only frequently redundant, as the information they provide is often drip-fed in briefings and missions, but they also take the place of scenes in which a main character could actually be advancing her story. Consequently, from the time Avril is jailed, up until the point a semblance of a plot emerges on Tyler Island, there are only 2 critical scenes. Everything else is chaff. I have a suspicion for why this is, and I'll get to it in a bit. Let's look at the characters first.
I was born downtown, in our capital.
Cossette is barely utilised. She's not even involved until the game is nearly over. As a saving grace, once she's in, she actually has stuff to do rather than just being set decoration. We've also been told she's incredibly charismatic, but this doesn't really come across when actually hearing her speak.
I wonder which path you would choose when looking at Harling's mirror.
Next. Schroeder was created specifically as a window into Mihaly, and it's a narrow one. Schroeder doesn't have much to say about him, and what he does say doesn't go much further to informing our understanding of him. More on Mihaly shortly. Schroeder also doubles as an antagonistic force the final act, but this aspect is very messy. Firstly, Schroeder is opposed not by the player or Avril, but Enola, a character whose name we only know through supplementary material, and who only has a role in one scene, the climax. In the climax we'll learn that Schroeder is a Belkan, and Avril tells us that Belkans are bad because they start conflicts.
That's just a stereotype.
The narrative is trying its hardest to convince us that Schroeder is working for a secret Belkan agenda, but because his actions are interchangeable with those of an Erusian, and his own testimony is incredibly vague, this feels really forced. Anyway, 2 minutes after revealing he's Belkan, he realizes Belka isn't important to him anymore. If this writing were any more compact, it could be flavor text.
Can you hear me? Pilot with the 3 strikes.
Mihaly's role in the intermissions is minimal, and while it's not to his detriment, he feels sorely underutilized. We're told he's a stoic character, and on top of that, he's never given any opportunity to interact with the other characters in the intermission, except the one up with Soul Squadron.
Yet what is a nation?
That sounds familiar. I got the impression reading Aces at War that the writers wanted him to be enigmatic, but during the game we're given more background information about him than literally any other character, and he has plenty to say during missions too.
This weapon is not enough to take down 3 strikes. This aircraft is my body. If they are not enough, then I must put my soul into it. There are pilots like you in every generation, and I've failed every last one of them.
So rather than enigmatic, it's like the writers forgot to actually give him scenes. There is some relief from this. In his final scene before the credits, he expresses his regrets. I think it's effective, but it's also one of the many moments in the game where there seems to be some vital context missing. What did he do to keep his wings? Why can he no longer fly? Whatever. Considering that he could have been the final enemy ace of the series, I think he's a highly appropriate character. He's not just an ace, but an ace of aces, who insists on going back into combat one last time. In spite of his best effort, the challenges he faces are too great and he is permanently grounded. His premise works as a metaphor for the series and its players, as does his ultimate fate were the series not renewed.
Hey you, dumbass with the scratches on his tail.
Avril is ostensibly the main character. Despite this, her growth as a person, motivation and conclusion are frustratingly vague. For most of the story, what she wants is to get out of the 444.
No way am I just gonna sit here and rot away in this hellhole. Dark blue.
I assume so she can keep flying. I think the writer's intention was that she would start out very self-centered, but soften over the course of the story, concluding with a relief effort at the space elevator. But she comes across as irritable more than self-centered.
That's because she's the scrap queen. Queen? More like a bad-tempered tomboy.
But right near the end, off-screen, she has a change of heart, and what she really wants is to help the refugees and help end the war.
This is just one of the many sides of war and what it does.
Adding to the already long list of missing scenes is Avril's conclusion. Whilst Avril provides a narration for the final cutscene, concluding the game as a whole, she herself is absent from these scenes. She tells us what Cossette, Mihaly, George, Enola and Alma are doing, but in regards to herself she says nothing concrete. I don't have a problem with giving a major character an ambiguous ending, but this kind of exit necessitates that the narrative highlights it in some way. Let's look at how Ace Combat 4 handles enemy ace Yellow 13.
Yellow 13's body vanished into the blue skies, never to return to Earth. Only a single handkerchief fluttered down from the sky where he disappeared. The barkeep's daughter and I had followed the squadron this far. Each of us had our own thoughts as we buried that handkerchief. It no longer mattered to me whether that was 13 or 4's grave. Their memories blurred together as one, and left the realm of reality like a dream.
The unfortunate thing about Avril is there's quite a lot to work with. She's unfairly imprisoned and she's been made into an unwilling gear in the Ocean war machine. The biggest missed opportunity is in regards to her father. She lost her father in the last war and resents him for playing the hero.
Of all the ways to get killed, that's gotta be the most pathetic one ever. Am I right?
In Mission 19, this happens.
But the kid tabloid went after his safe. He ran that distance with a girl in his hands. Good.
This would have been the perfect catalyst for Avril coming to understand her father and find peace with his death. In the game's closing scene, she could have been addressing her late father instead of her late grandfather, and while it wouldn't have been much, it would have been enough to connect the start of her journey with the end of it. For those familiar with Katabuchi's other work, the unfortunate state of the story leads to asking, what the hell happened? How does a writer with such a consistent track record produce something not just unengaging, but borderline incoherent? It's no secret the game's development was very rough. In December 2017, development of the game was rebooted. The game had already been in development for over 2 years at this point, and was slated for a 2018 release, but the project was not on track. From the official development diary on Bandai Namco's website, we know that brand director Kono insisted on the story being consistent with the PSX 2015 trailer, and that this was achieved very close to finishing the game. However, Katabuchi wrote the script for Ace Combat 7 in 2015, whilst also directing his film in this corner of the world. After handing over the script to Project Aces, he was not involved in the game's development at all, so the script was rewritten at least once and by someone else. Why the script was rewritten is anyone's guess. One possibility is that key game content was cut, or revised, making the original script untenable. Or maybe they were just over budget and couldn't justify more CGI. With both of these possibilities in mind, and the intermission's patchy state, it's likely the original script was chopped down significantly, so to bridge the gap between cut scenes and recontextualize existing scenes, some new monologues were written. These were not only wholly inelegant, but were recorded without sufficient voice direction, leading to some rather second-rate delivery. Some intermissions like Drag Racer, Dumbass, The Phone Call, The New System, and particularly King of the Heavens, seem very much like Katabuchi's other work, leading me to believe that these made it into the game largely intact. However, combined with the revised scenes, they create a disjointed story, lacking in storytelling, but still somewhat consistent with its own marketing. Looking through pre-release material, we can catch some glimpses of an early vision of the story.
This is Princess Rosa Cossette Delise of the Kingdom of Erugia. The Ocean Federation has forced construction of its giant space elevator on our territory, which is clearly an illegal and unforgivable violation of our nation's sovereignty. Osea attacks indiscriminately and has remorsefully injured countless innocent civilians.
Cossette isn't just cheerleading the war effort, she's out for blood. She was part of the original concept for Ace Combat 7, and it's extremely likely her original role was much larger, with much more emphasis placed on her turning the gears of war.
I'm curious to know, does the color of the sky matter to you? My grandfather tossed a magazine to me that read, "Soon there will be no one gripping a control stick and taking to the skies." Sure, I'm probably heading straight into hell, but whatever. Adios, you damn fool. Burn Osea to the ground. Do you wonder what it means to be a prisoner here? Everything is rotten to the core. Another newbie's been tossed into the mix. I wonder what sort of crap he's done.
She's had enough of Osea's shit. A lot of these lines are in the final game with some minor differences, but the delivery is markedly different. Just to refresh your memory, here's how it sounds in game.
Yeah, I know. I'm heading into hell. Whatever.
It's just so flat. Schroeder's line delivery is also slightly different, but not as substantial as Avril. One plot point that has become a bit of a joke is Schroeder takes Enola and Alma with him to the space elevator. In the game's ending cutscene, Avril tells us that Mihaly is at the space elevator. With this in mind, it may have been that the final confrontation with Mihaly was also at the space elevator, and Enola and Alma are just with him as they have been previously. Given how many things are left ambiguous, it's strange that an explanation was created for this by adding child abductors to Schroeder's resume. I'm mentioning cut content not because I think there's a better version of the story on the cutting room floor. It's entirely possible that Katabuchi overstretched himself trying to write Ace Combat 7 and direct In This Corner of the World at the same time. I'm mentioning them because looking at it does help shed some light on some of the strange writing decisions. If you look further into some of the cut content that's been dug up, there are a few more details that emerge, but nothing significant. That's enough said about the intermission. Let's move on to Trigger's story.
Is everyone here?
Because Ace Combat is structured around discrete missions, Trigger's story is naturally more episodic, with each mission being a drum in miniature. Project Aces has come a long way in refining the style of storytelling since Electrosphere, and it's just as good as it's ever been in Skies Unknown. There are some overarching elements too, but much like the intermission, they're undercooked. For the first 4 missions, you're flying for the IUN, flying with you a Knocker, Brownie and Clown, guiding you as AWACS Skykeeper. These guys aren't important, so they're only given token amounts of characterization, which is enough for their negligible a role in the story. Starting from mission 5, you're flying for the Ocean Penal Unit 444. A lot of work has gone into establishing what kind of place a 444 airbase is, and it's one of the few points where the intermissions actually complement Trigger's story.
Its gun was aimed at the yard. This was a prison.
Just listening to the main theme, you get a sense of what it's like. It's remote and forlorn, with some underlying tension. What are the people like?
You're not cleared for takeoff. Obey orders. Go to hell.
Before you've even made it off the runway, it's apparent things are a little bit different here. These guys are only out for themselves and bigger constantly.
Alright, I'm assuming command. All aircraft support me. Who's gonna dance to your line tune?
Trigger, keep an eye on your head count. We can compare later.
Yeah, I'm betting that report will get dressed up real pretty.
In addition to the colourful cast of convicts, you have AWACS Bandog.
Excited to have another murderer with you?
Bandog is the ever-present reminder that this is the penal unit and you are expendable. He insults you for poor performance and his praise is often barbed.
Trigger's still with us. Must have the devil in his corner. Spare 7, what happens if the one you've bet on dies while landing?
Eventually the 444 come to respect you, and because of how you're treated initially, it feels a little bit earned, and not just a game filleting you.
Stick with Trigger and you'll make it. Worked like a charm.
If you think that's all you need to survive, you might as well get your last rites now.
Exactly, that was all dumb luck. Wait, you were in earshot, Count?
Must have been straining to hear from high altitude.
They aren't deep characters, but they are some of the most fun and memorable in the entire franchise. During Mission 9, when the motley crew of convicts encounter a problem they can't solve as individuals, they adapt and overcome by working together as a team.
All aircraft, gather around me! I mean Trigger! What?
By rallying around Trigger, it would seem the 444 are set to become the unlikely heroes of the Lighthouse War, but their story comes to an abrupt end. You and Count are transferred to the secret and elite long-range strategic strike group, and the 444 effectively cease to exist.
The company commander has made it clear he'd like you both to officially join our squadron.
You met these guys previously, but you don't know much about them. That won't change because these guys are as flat as cardboard, and with the exception of Lancaster, none of them are witty or interesting. I've completed the game 7 times, and I can't tell a goddamn thing about Taylor, Lanza or Skald. This wouldn't be a problem if they only showed up a couple of times, but these are characters I'd be spending the majority of the game with. It's so disappointing that so much effort went into establishing the 444's unique premise and characters, only for it to be discarded after 5 missions for a completely forgettable military unit.
Yikes!
There is someone who is more than just a facade though, and that's Count. When Count first appears in Mission 5, it's not obvious that he'll be sticking around for the rest of the game. While he's not as one-dimensional as Champ and High Roller, he's given no special significance.
Anyone got a smoke? I'll owe you one.
Given that he's also the only character besides enemy ace Mihaly to have any character growth, I'm giving him the dubious title of main character for Trigger's story. He's not a bad character, but I can't imagine many players getting excited when they realise he's here to stay. His self-absorbed, narcissistic banter has been funny, but he's not exactly endearing.
Well, yeah, it's not like there's anything I can learn from Trigger.
I suspect the writers were aware of this, which is why he's suddenly much friendlier in Mission 10.
Trigger's movements are insane. Damn, buddy.
Perhaps the writers intentionally downplayed his significance so that the player can be surprised when he joins them, but this has the same effect as surprising the player with an escort mission, which mission 10 is. As I've said, Count does have character growth, but it is a bit scattered. His main thing seems to be learning to become a better team player, and there is a marked contrast between Count in Mission 5 and Count in Mission 20, but this mostly manifests in telling you that you've done a good job, adding his voice to the growing chorus. His big character moment comes in the final mission, when he follows you into the undersea tunnel beneath the space elevator to help you take out the last drone. But as he does nothing useful, this just makes him look stupid. There was probably some cut content here. So that's Count. Not great, not terrible, but okay. There's one other character I'd like to return to, and that's Mihaly. Kono stated in Aces of War that they hoped to make an enemy ace as captivating as Yellow 13, and that they felt they'd succeeded in Mihaly. The player certainly has a more complex relationship with Mihaly than Yellow 13, with each encounter building on the last, but it's an illusion that is easily broken. Mihaly first appears in Mission 3, but only as an unsubtitled voice over the radio. He takes out Brownie, and you're both powerless to stop him and completely ignorant of his nature.
Bandit is down.
In your first real encounter with him, he's clearly under pressure, you trade blows, and he retreats. You know who he is, and you know his weakness. In your second encounter, his weakness has been alleviated, you fail to take him down, and you easily turn your commander into hot wreckage.
Missile closing! I'll keep him on me! Just a bit longer!
In the third encounter, he's hot off a win, and he's got some new tricks.
High-speed projectile launch from enemy aircraft.
Despite this, you overcome him, and in doing so, he realizes his folly.
This was all due to my ego.
This sounds great, but there's a big catch. Prior to your final encounter with him, he is literally invincible. This wouldn't be a problem if the mission ended as soon as you did enough damage to him, but the second encounter has a lengthy scripted sequence during which you can hit him with enough missiles to take down the National Bird. The very nature of having discrete missions necessitates that Mihaly can not only be taken down in the third encounter, but without trying to maintain the illusion he plays by the same rules as other enemies, the entire relationship feels artificial. On an increasingly petty note, I always hated the moniker the Oceans gave him. Mr. X sounds really silly. This has all been fairly negative, so before finishing up I'd like to offer some praise for a few of the game's set pieces. During Mission 4 you're providing cover for a damaged aircraft carrying former President Harling. At some point you'll open fire on an enemy drone and then this will happen.
The UAVs are continuing.
Make two. Oh my god, Mother Goose 1 has been shot down.
Up until this point, transitions from gameplay are well signalled, making a hard cut that much more surprising. The chatter over the radio builds from shock to accusation to suspicion and condemnation very naturally.
Mage 1. Was it Trigger? Trigger was the closest.
This entire exchange could have been done without interrupting gameplay, but taking control away from the player further cements that the situation is no longer under their control. Using strictly exterior shots of the aircraft is no doubt just a necessity of a small budget, but it serves to make all the dialogue that much more impersonal. Even the way your allies move into formation feels very menacing. Underscoring it is the music, which starts off somber but quickly becomes tense. It's great. In a similar incident, after completing your primary objective for Mission 10, you encounter some aircraft identifying themselves as friendly.
Ocean fighters do not attack! Shit! These guys aren't allies! Are they spoofing our IFF? At this rate, no one's going to get out alive.
After some initial confusion, the convicts have the big moment where they rally together and work as a team.
I've sent new ID data. Enemies will be marked as enemies.
And then this happens.
Count. 1 to go. Go get him. 1 to go. Where is it? Count. Rhino, this is it. Alright, I got the last one.
Oh yeah! You like that, you dirty freak?
Damn it! God damn it! Why is this?
Full band's down! Friendly fire?
Full band got tagged as an enemy.
What?
You did that on purpose, Bandog. Did what? Don't play dumb. Full band. It was an accident. It got out of control. Return to base. Son of a bitch!
On my initial playthrough, this was the peak of my investment in the story. Was it an accident? Does Bandog have his own agenda? Can I still trust him? Have I been lied to? Unfortunately, there is no payoff. Bandog makes his final appearance in the next mission and is never seen again. I want to believe there was something more planned here because it's by far the game's most interesting point, but there's nothing to suggest that. The game's other peak is Mission 19. In the lead up to release, Kono was concerned that there was no moment that would stick with players. Or, as Kono himself says, it didn't give people goosebumps. It was far too close to release to add more content, so instead, Kono got on the phone to composer Keiki Kobayashi to request one song, a masterpiece. The development team was so impressed with the new track that even though they were past the deadline, they worked hard to re-choreograph it into Mission 19. The result is Daredevil. The musician Leonard Bernstein once said, to achieve great things, two things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time. Daredevil is a testament to these words, and for it I have nothing but praise for Kobayashi, Kono and the rest of the team. It is an impossible act to follow though, and in its wake, Mission 20 feels anticlimactic. But the shadow it casts is longer than just the next mission. As the game's best track, it will inevitably be heard by some players prior to playing the game. Hell, some might even pick up the game just because of how good it is. While I don't think players need to go in with virgin ears to get the best experience from it, I do suspect that building an association with it beyond the game will poison the experience of actually playing the mission. Normally these sorts of videos cap off with some sort of poignant, witty message. I don't have anything of the sort. I just want to say I really like the game and I wanted to explore the story in more detail than anyone else has bothered to before, or maybe more than it possibly deserves. Hope you enjoyed watching it.